It was the morning of August 3rd, 1899, when the fog rolled in thick over the Gulf of Maine. The harbormaster of Bar Harbor, Mr. Elias Roach, recorded in his daily logbook that visibility had dropped to barely 20 feet. The sea, usually bright and churning under the summer sun, was eerily still, glassy, like the surface of a pond that hadn't been disturbed in years. The birds had gone quiet. Fishermen refused to sail. At precisely 10:47 a.m., a silhouette emerged from the mist. A schooner. 2 masts. Charcoal black hull. No visible flags. No name on the bow. It drifted slowly, almost deliberately, into port, sails half furled as if someone had started to drop anchor and then changed their mind. No crew were seen on deck. No voices. No movement. The only sound was the groaning of the wooden hull as it bumped gently against the pier, ropes dangling into the water, untouched. The locals stared in silence. "Where's her flag?" someone muttered. "Could be from the Carolinas," offered another. "Looks too old. That wood's near rotted." Elias Roach was the first aboard. He'd been harbormaster for nearly 15 years, had seen French galleons, lost Canadian trawlers, even a damaged British warship once, but never a vessel like this. He approached with a pistol tucked in his coat and a lantern in hand. Climbing the rope ladder up to the deck, he noted the salt-eaten planks and barnacles clinging to the rudder. This ship hadn't been cleaned or claimed for a long time. The deck was soaked, slick with seawater and something darker, maybe oil, maybe blood. The wheel was spinning slowly, lazily, even though there was no wind. Then he found the manifest. It was tucked inside a rusted tin box in the captain's quarters. The room stank of mildew and rot. The walls were warped from water damage. A tattered American flag hung above the cot, moth-eaten and gray. Inside the manifest, 12 names. All men. No ages. No nationalities. No hometowns. Each name written in a tight, hurried scrawl that didn't match the elegant cursive headings. The last page had a single word written over and over again in black ink: "Forgive." And none of the names had signatures. It was as if the names had been written about them, not by them. By nightfall, the ship had been roped down and guards posted. But in a town like Bar Harbor, news spreads fast. By evening, townsfolk gathered near the docks with lanterns and questions. Reverend Amos Brant, a man known more for his fire and brimstone sermons than empathy, called it an unholy omen. "The sea brings judgment," he shouted from atop a crate, arms raised like Moses. 12 names, 12 disciples, but no Christ among them. Children were ushered inside, doors locked, lamps snuffed early. That night, a storm rolled in. By morning, 3 things had changed. First, the ship was gone. The schooner, ropes, hull, and all, vanished as if it had never touched the pier. No debris, no wake, only an oily slick on the water. Second, Elias Roach was missing. His cot untouched, his lantern shattered at the foot of the dock. Third, on the notice board outside the church, someone or something had nailed a page from the manifest. It listed a new name at the bottom: Elias Roach, still unsigned. The town went into lockdown. For weeks, no one sailed. Superstitions surged like wildfire. Some whispered of a ghost crew collecting the souls of the damned. Others said it was a plague ship, cursed by its own sins. Only one thing was agreed upon: something unnatural had docked at Bar Harbor that day. The U.S. Coast Guard was contacted, but when agents arrived on August 21st, they found no records. The logs were gone. The harbormaster's office was ransacked. The ledger had been torn to pieces and burned in the fireplace, though no one had entered the building. 12 people would vanish over the next 12 nights. One each night. No bodies. No traces. Only their names, always appearing by morning, nailed, pinned, or carved into that same church notice board. All from the original manifest. No signatures. Only the word "forgive" scrawled beneath each. Bar Harbor never recovered. By the end of 1899, half the town had relocated inland. The other half refused to speak of the ship. A fog still clings heavier near the docks, even on the clearest summer days. Fishermen tell their sons not to sail during the anniversary week. No boats dock on August 3rd. And in the museum archive, buried deep under fragile paper and dust, lies a single charred page. A manifest. 12 names. Still unsigned. And space for one more. Word count. 1,400. The sun hadn't yet burned off the morning mist when the harbor patrol skiff pulled alongside the mysterious vessel. The sea was uncommonly still, the only sound the gentle lapping of water against wood. Lieutenant Marcus Hale, a man of strict routine and sharper instinct, squinted up at the hull. No visible damage, no smoke, no sign of life. Yet the ship had come into harbor under its own momentum, silent and aimless. With a nod, he motioned his 2 men to throw grappling hooks. The wooden deck creaked as they climbed aboard. Hale was first over the rail. His boots met a thin layer of dew, as if the ship had just exhaled from a long night's sleep. But something wasn't right. The sails were half lowered, as though frozen mid-command. A lantern hung from a post still glowed faintly with oil flame, defying the logic of abandonment. The others joined him silently. Together, they advanced down the deck. A set of copper pots sat undisturbed on an outdoor prep table. A knife beside a half-peeled apple. A teacup resting gently in a porcelain saucer, still warm when Hale pressed the back of his hand to it. It was as if the ship's passengers had simply vanished. No sign of struggle. No overturned furniture. Not even a drop of blood. "Hello," Hale called, voice echoing down the corridor leading into the captain's quarters. "This is the Charleston Harbor Authority. Come forward." Silence answered. Inside the mess hall, they found rows of pewter plates laid out neatly on a long dining table, each setting arranged with a kind of ceremonial precision, spoons aligned, napkins folded, cups half filled with a dark, now lukewarm tea. Flies buzzed lazily near the bread rolls. The sense of presence was overwhelming. Chairs were pushed out as if diners had just stood up. A pipe still smoldered on the floor near a reading chair. One of the men gagged softly from the tension building in the air. "Whatever happened, it happened fast," Hale muttered. They proceeded to the captain's quarters. The door creaked open, resisting like it knew it held secrets. Dust motes danced in shafts of light spilling through shuttered windows. A ledger lay open on the desk. Hale leaned over it. The manifest page was there, burned on one side, the rest curled like a dead leaf. The ink was smeared, as though someone had tried to erase names with water and haste. Only a handful of words were legible. Departed Charleston, 12 passengers, name redacted. The bottom half was missing entirely. Behind the desk was a shelf lined with small figurines, tiny ivory saints, worn down from handling. One was missing from the row. A faint outline in the dust hinted at its absence. What kind of ship was this? One of the younger patrolmen whispered. No crew. No signs of violence. It's like they walked into thin air. But Hale couldn't answer. His eyes had caught something else. Etched into the wooden beam above the captain's desk in crude, shallow strokes were the words. The ones below called them back. Suddenly, the remaining oil lamps flickered. No wind, no movement, yet the flames danced wildly. The smell of burning paper lingered, though none could find the source. Hale closed the manifest book slowly, unease gripping his chest. The mystery was only deepening, and the harbor now held a ship returned from somewhere it never should have gone. They marked the vessel as quarantined. But even as they left it behind, the feeling stayed with them, as though the ship wasn't abandoned, as though it had brought something back. The manifest was the heart of every voyage, every captain's sacred ledger. It carried the names of souls entrusted to the sea. Yet here, on the unnamed ship, the manifest held nothing but emptiness. Not a single passenger listed, not a crewman, no cook, no steward, no first mate. Just one phrase scrawled in a careful, almost reverent hand. Total manifest, 12 souls. No names, not even initials. Lieutenant Hale brought the ledger to the mainland that same day. It was handed off to the Historical Archives in Charleston, where maritime archivists dusted off thick records from 1899 and beyond, scouring every known departure that could have matched the ship's design and timber origin. Hours turned into days. Every dockmaster's log was compared, every transatlantic register examined. Not one mention of this vessel, no captain's license, no customs entry, no departure log. It was as if the ship had sailed out of time itself, untethered from paper or memory. But the most disturbing discovery came a week later, when the ledger was examined under ultraviolet light in the State Forensics Lab. There were faint impressions beneath the ink, the ghost of an earlier page. A page that had been violently scrubbed out with water and something acidic. Only fragmented impressions remained. A few slanted curves, a crossbar, the top half of a capital M. But no full name. 12 lines, 12 smudge marks, 12 missing names. The lead forensic analyst said the acid used wasn't from any known ink remover or maritime-grade bleach. It was something else, something botanical, possibly homemade, something meant to make sure the names could never return. The narrator, our modern voice, documenting the case from present-day interviews and case files, chimes in, voice hushed. 12 souls, but no names, no documentation, no past. As if whoever they were never meant to be remembered. Or perhaps someone didn't want us to remember them. In the background of the video, we see flashes of old black and white photographs, harbor workers, sailors, churchgoers. The camera zooms in slowly on a 19th century family portrait with faces faded or scratched out. An eerie silence follows. The narrator continues. We searched every census, from 1890 to 1900. We checked newspaper archives for missing persons. No group of 12 was ever reported gone. Not together. Not around Charleston. It's as if they didn't disappear. It's as if they were never recorded in the first place. But then, one sliver of information surfaces. A priest's journal from a church near the wharf, dated September 3, 1899, 2 weeks before the ship appeared. In it, he wrote, "They came at dusk. 12 of them. No questions. Paid in gold. Wore no colors, only black. I blessed them before they boarded. They told me not to remember their faces." Father Thomas Renwick, St. Mary's Parish, Charleston. He died 3 days after that entry. No cause of death listed in the coroner's report. The autopsy was sealed. When historians attempted to retrieve the journal, they found only torn pages in the church vault. His last entries missing. The voiceover poses the unsettling question. Why would a group go to such lengths to erase their identities? What kind of voyage demands complete anonymity? And who or what were they sailing toward? A map is shown next, with red thread trailing from Charleston's coastline into open water. But no known destination was plotted. No lighthouse logs saw them leave. No other vessel crossed their path. Yet something had called them out to sea. And now something had returned. The journal was found in 1972, inside the rotting beams of a collapsed storage shed near the Charleston docks. Bound in cracked leather, its pages were brittle with salt and age, but the ink, dark and deliberate, remained legible. The name etched inside, Matthew Griggs, 1899. Occupation, dockworker. Age 46. Widowed. No next of kin. No one had ever heard of him. The first pages were mundane, records of cargo manifests, back pain complaints, and tally notes about how many barrels of salt pork had been offloaded from schooners bound for the Carolinas. But around page 37, the entries changed. They became quieter, shorter. Confessional. One date stood out. September 3rd, 1899. It was nearly midnight when the knock came. Not from a foreman or the usual bell, but a slow, deliberate knock at my door. 3 times. No voice. No breath. Just the sound. Matthew wrote that he was summoned by name, though he never said by whom. He arrived at Dock 6, where he'd worked for 20 years, only to find no ship listed in the log. But there it was, a tall, shadow-drenched vessel, tied to the pier as if it had always been there. There were no lanterns lit, no sailors shouting, no dock hands beside him, only the vessel and the figures. They were dressed in black, full-length coats, like dusters, buttoned up to the throat. I couldn't see their faces. Not for the dark. No, it was something else. Like I didn't want to look too close. Like my mind rejected it. He recalled them unloading something heavy. Coffins, he thought at first, but they made no noise when dropped, and left no dents on the planks. 12 crates. Long, narrow, each sealed with red wax. They walked like mourners, but carried no dead. Their feet made no sound. They didn't grunt or speak or motion. They just moved like a memory slipping out of reach. He tried to ask one of them where the cargo was headed, but the figure didn't turn. It raised a hand, not as a threat, but a dismissal. The entry continued. I wanted to leave. I remember turning to go, and then waking up in my own bed, boots still on, fingers black with wax. I hadn't been paid. I never saw the crates again, and no ship was at the dock that morning. In the following entries, Matthew's tone turned desperate. He wrote of whispers in the night, of his reflection not matching his own movements in the mirror. He'd see wet footprints leading from his door to the edge of his bed, but never hear a sound. He started drawing the same shape over and over in the margins, a circle with 3 sharp vertical lines inside, like teeth or bars. The final entry was the shortest. They weren't loading the ship. They were returning to it. I was never meant to see them. And then, in shaky pen, I hear the knock again. It's been 73 days since that night. It's back. There were no further pages. Back in present-day narration, the historian reading from the journal holds it delicately, like a cursed object. His voice is careful, unsure if what he's reading is truth or delusion. The ship's logs say it was never docked. The port records show no Griggs. His name's not in the workers' union, and no one at Dock 6 remembered him, not even by rumor. But the journal exists, and 12 crates were real. At this point in the video, eerie reenactments fade in. Shadowy figures move across a fog-drenched dock, the sound of water slapping against wood, a long, echoing creak of ship timbers groaning in the dark. A distant bell tolls. Then silence. The narrator continues. 12 passengers. 12 crates. No names. No destination. No return. And one man who saw what no one else was meant to. The screen fades to black, then flashes that same strange circle with 3-line symbol, burned into wood this time, the edges still smoldering. The journal had been disturbing. But the logbook, this was different. This came from Onboard. Recovered decades later from a blackened trunk inside a collapsed lighthouse cellar off the Georgia coast, the captain's log was thought to be irretrievable. Waterlogged, burnt along the edges, its ink smeared with brine and mold. But archivists pieced it back together, entry by entry. There was no ship name, no home port. The first intact page simply began. Day 11. We lost sight of land 2 nights ago. Fog has returned, thicker than before. Crew complains of headaches. Unseasonal cold. The cook swears he saw frost on the barrels. This wasn't an ordinary voyage. No mention of cargo, no charts, no manifest. The only details were strange, unsettling observations, each entry more paranoid than the last. Day 14. The birds have stopped following us. Not a gull in sight. One sat on the mast this morning, but when I looked again, it was gone. Not flown. Gone. Day 15. Fog hasn't lifted in 4 days. Even at noon, the light feels wrong. Like it's coming from the sea, not the sky. It was clear that whatever they were transporting wasn't natural. The log hints at 12 passengers, but only 11 are ever mentioned by name. And then, on day 18, this. The 12th passenger does not eat, sleeps during the day, speaks in a language no one recognizes. I've told the crew to keep their distance. They refuse to go near his cabin. He does not knock when he enters. The captain's tone shifts. Command turns to confession. He begins doubting his own senses, questioning whether the crew is being manipulated. He reports mirrors cracking in the officers' quarters, compasses spinning aimlessly, rats jumping into the sea in the middle of the night. I watched Abel speak to him yesterday. Didn't hear what was said. But after, Abel slit his own tongue and whispered things that bled from the air like smoke. He hasn't spoken since. The pages go dark from here, less formal, more frantic. The handwriting becomes erratic. Ink blots streak across paragraphs, as if the captain's hands were trembling. Some pages are torn, others appear written over older ones. One strange phrase keeps repeating, scratched into margins, scrawled in red. It is not a man. It is not a man. It is not a man. The 12th passenger, whoever or whatever it was, had changed the entire course of the voyage. Day 21. The fog has weight now. We carry it inside us. We breathe it. I coughed up seaweed last night. Day 23. The crew has stopped sleeping. Or dreaming. I'm not sure anymore which is worse. Day 25. The moon is wrong. It's there when the sun is up, and gone at night. What sky is this? The most chilling entry comes without a date. We shouldn't have brought it on board. And that's where the log ends, mid-sentence, mid-thought. Nothing more. The final few pages are torn, charred, as though someone had tried to burn the book, perhaps the captain himself, perhaps something else. The documentary voiceover returns. No ship name, no coordinates, no survivors. And yet this log surfaced, inside a lighthouse sealed since 1902, 1,000 miles from where the vessel supposedly sailed. As the camera zooms in on the log-stained pages, one sketch becomes visible in the corner, the same symbol found in the dockworker's journal, a circle with 3 jagged vertical lines. In the background, faint sounds swell, wind, water, something tapping on wood or bone. The narrator continues. The log confirms what the dockworker feared. The ship didn't bring them here. It was returning to them. And the 12th passenger wasn't a passenger at all. It was the reason the others never came back. The screen fades to black, with a whisper barely audible behind the closing line. He does not knock when he enters. It was a story passed down in maritime whispers. A tale most dismissed as drunken sailors' lore, until too many ships vanished without reason. Until too many logs ended with the same number, 12. The legend had a name, the 12th passenger. Every 60 years, give or take a storm or a war, it would happen. A vessel would leave port, seemingly routine, merchant ships, schooners, even fishing vessels. There would be no warning, no unusual weather, no strange cargo, just the final tally. 12 aboard. None returned. Folklore experts had traced the earliest version back to 1623, with an English merchant ship called the Marrowglass. It disappeared in calm waters off the coast of Cornwall. A passing vessel swore they saw 11 crewmen waving from the deck, and one figure behind them, unmoving, cloaked, barefoot. The ship was never seen again. Then again in 1683, off the coast of Lisbon. Then 1744 in the Adriatic. Always 60 years apart. Always 12 aboard. And always the 12th was different. In 1889, a retired lighthouse keeper from Cumberland wrote a confession in his final days, describing an eerie night decades earlier. The fog was thick as curdled milk. Couldn't see a thing through the looking glass. But I heard the bell, a ship calling from the mist. So I lit the flame, and then I saw them. 11 climbed aboard. I counted myself, one after the next, calling out names to the steward. But there was a 12th. Didn't climb, didn't speak, just drifted up the gangway like fog made flesh. No name, no bag, just a shadow that moved wrong. When asked why he hadn't reported it, he said, "I forgot, lad." That's the worst part. We all forgot the next morning. Didn't remember the ship came in at all. But the log was open, ink still wet. I never wrote in it. This phenomenon became known as port amnesia. Villages with small harbors would one day forget they even had a dock. Maps would still show it, but locals would claim, "No ships come here anymore. That pier's been sealed for decades. There's no lighthouse on our coast." And yet, the 12th passenger had passed through. The narrator's voice softens, more intimate now, like a warning. It's not always a man. Sometimes it looks like a child. Sometimes like a woman in mourning. Sometimes it's a shadow between shadows, seen only when no one is looking. And each time, the ship disappears, swallowed not by the sea, but by something within it. A team of modern researchers tried to break the cycle. In 1949, they tracked the 60-year pattern and identified a possible port, Winter's Head, a forgotten inlet town off the coast of South Carolina. The team installed cameras, posted observers, and waited. But no ship came. Instead, locals began reporting odd events, missing time, overlapping dreams, bleeding mirrors. Then one night, the harbor bell rang on its own. The sea was calm, moonless, and the watchers saw it. A schooner gliding in without oars or wind. On deck, 11 passengers looked confused, as if waking from sleep, and behind them, barely visible, something leaning just outside the lantern light. The cameras failed. The watchers vanished. The harbor was dry by morning, as if nothing had docked there in years. A single child's drawing was recovered near the shoreline, sealed in a jar. Crayon on paper. It showed a boat with 11 smiling faces, and a blank black shape standing behind them, eyes like open wounds. This wasn't folklore anymore. This was a cycle, a curse that moved with tides and fog. Something older than maps, smarter than men. It didn't need to be invited aboard. It simply needed there to be 12. The narrator returns, solemn now. The ship that left on September 3, 1899, was part of the cycle. It had no name, no signed manifest, but it had 12 aboard. And one was not meant to return. The screen flashes images, old newspaper clippings, ship silhouettes fading into fog, symbols carved into driftwood, a single boot found on an empty pier. If the pattern holds, it's been over 120 years since the last ship vanished. Which means another is due. And just before the screen cuts to black, a voice from archival tape, barely audible. "I saw it. I swear, there were only 11. The 12th it didn't belong." At first glance, Winter's Head was the kind of town you'd pass through and never remember. Tucked into a salt-bitten pocket of South Carolina's coast, it had no major roads, no gas stations, no lights bright enough to outshine the dusk. By 1920, most maps had stopped marking it entirely. And yet the census kept listing it. Not with full detail, just an unshaded square. Sometimes a population of 12. Sometimes none. The first official mention of Winter's Head appeared in a shipping ledger from 1791, back when it was still a bustling inlet port known for oyster trading and a modest whaling fleet. Its docks saw dozens of ships each year. It had a tavern, a chapel, and a lighthouse that pulsed through the fog like a guardian eye. Then one summer in 1839, the harbor silted over in a single night. Locals claimed the water had simply drained away, like something had pulled the sea beneath the sand. No storm, no quake, just silence. And when the fog cleared the next morning, the water had returned, but the pier was gone. That was the first time Winters had forgot. No one remembered building the dock. No one remembered the tavern's name. The lighthouse door was sealed shut, rusted from within. Entire buildings stood empty, overgrown with ivy and memory rot. And yet, the town remained. Generations came and went, always small, always quiet. A few hundred at best, though stories say they never stayed more than 2 generations. Something always drove them out, or drew them under. In 1949, a paranormal researcher named Dr. Ellis Rowe believed Winters Head was part of a larger phenomenon, temporal coastal repression. He theorized that certain towns could become unstuck from historical continuity, looping through the same decades endlessly, shedding memory each time. Rowe's notes were never published. His journals ended in mid-sentence, with one final line scrawled upside down in the margin. The fog is inside the walls. Then, nothing more. Eyewitness reports from nearby settlements described strange happenings whenever someone approached Winters Head. In 1961, a team of geographers attempting to remap the coast arrived with topographical tools and aerial cameras. They camped 5 miles outside the boundary. By morning, all 12 tents were empty, fires still warm, coffee pots bubbling over. The only clue was a weather balloon tethered to a tree, its camera still running. The footage showed something impossible. 11 people walking in a straight line toward the town, the 12th standing motionless on the trail's edge, then slowly turning to face the camera. No face, just mist where a face should be. That camera melted from the inside. Winters Head had earned a new nickname among those who studied the arcane: the town without time. The documentary narrator returns, voice measured and reverent. But what if Winters Head didn't forget its harbor? What if the harbor forgot Winters Head? Deep Dive Records uncovered letters between port authorities in Charleston and Savannah dating back to 1899. Each referenced a routine supply run scheduled to drop anchor in Winters Head. Each ship was marked with 12 passengers. Not one completed the route. By the mid-1900s, local legends had taken on darker tones. Children whispered of ghost sailors walking through their fields on moonless nights, of ship bells heard inland, of seaweed growing in attic corners. One man, a trucker named Harlan Beck, wrote a post online in 2003. It was deleted within hours, but archived by web crawlers. I took a wrong turn in Georgetown. Ended up somewhere I couldn't place. Roads didn't make sense. All sand and salt in the air. There was a town sign, said Winters Head. I swear to God, I saw boats on dry land, floating. No water, just shadow. And a woman on the pier pointing into nothing. I blinked and I was back on the highway. No road behind me. No official coordinates for Winters Head exist now. But satellite scans sometimes show a faint outline, half eroded, just below the tree lines south of Mills Inlet. Locals avoid it. The forest is too quiet. Birds don't fly overhead. And every few years, someone disappears. Not many. Just enough to make 12. The screen fades to black, then fades in again, a found photo, bent at the corners. It shows a group of 11 sailors standing beside a small boat, smiling, arms slung across shoulders. A casual, joyful image, until you look at the far left. There's a shadow at the edge of the frame, a silhouette blurred beyond recognition, not holding still, but caught moving. Its hand is outstretched, just brushing the shoulder of the man closest to it. In pencil, someone has scribbled beneath the image, Winters Head, 1899, before we set off. None of them were seen again. The narrator concludes the chapter in a low, unsettling murmur. Some towns are swallowed by time. Some are reclaimed by the sea. But Winter's Head exists in between. It doesn't just forget. It invites forgetting. It breathes it into you. And when the next fog rolls in, and the tides are just right, the harbor will return. 12 will board. 1 will be the fog. The sun never rose in Larch Hollow the way it did in the rest of the world. That morning, if it could be called that, a gray pall clung low in the air, thick as wool and twice as suffocating. Marin's boots squelched in the damp soil as she crossed the threshold of the church once more, the same doorway she had sworn never to return through. But what choice did she have now? The voices hadn't stopped. If anything, they grew stronger, louder, more articulate. The night before it ended in chaos, Father Elric's screams still echoed in Marin's ears. His body had vanished, just vanished. The floor had cracked open with a sound like snapping bone, and then he was gone. No blood, no trace. Now the church sat quietly, as though nothing had happened. The pews were rearranged. They faced the pulpit again. No scorch marks, no shattered glass, nothing. Marin's breath trembled as she passed by the wooden seats. Something brushed against her shoulder, though the aisle was clear. Her flashlight flickered. She slapped it once, twice. The beam steadied, but its light seemed absorbed by the darkness rather than cutting through it. She was not alone. Somewhere behind her, the door shut with a dull, final click. Marin spun, but there was no one. Only the heavy wooden doors, sealed. There had to be a way out. She refused to believe she was trapped. Not yet. She made her way to the altar. The floorboards here were different. Newer. Or perhaps not newer, cleaner. She knelt, brushing away dust. Her fingers found a notch between the boards. A seam, hidden beneath layers of paint and time. She dug her nails in, pulled. The plank shifted. Beneath it, darkness. A void. A space that had no right existing beneath this church. She shone her flashlight down. A ladder. Old. Rotten. But intact. Her breath caught. She was going down. The first step snapped beneath her, but she caught herself. The second held. One by one, she descended. The air grew colder, wetter, smelling of mildew and something worse, metallic, like rust or blood. At the bottom, a tunnel stretched before her, carved from stone. Not professionally. These were chisel marks. Hand-hewn, desperate, angry. The walls dripped with condensation. She walked. Her light passed over symbols etched into the walls. Unfamiliar, ancient, the same ones she'd seen in the priest's notebook. The language of the damned. Then she saw it. A door, wooden, reinforced with iron bands. Marin hesitated. Something moved behind it. She opened it anyway. The room beyond was a chapel, or had once been. Now it was a chamber of horror. Stained glass fragments glittered on the floor. An altar, blackened with soot, stood at the far end. Chains hung from the ceiling, swaying with a breeze that had no source. And there they were, the choir, shadowy figures, motionless, no faces, just outlines, as if they were carved from the dark itself. They turned toward her. No eyes. But they saw. She backed away, but the door slammed shut behind her. The figures began to sing. A hymn not meant for human ears. The notes bent around reality itself, clawing at her mind. She screamed, covered her ears, fell to the floor. A voice cut through the chaos. A whisper deep and old. The church stands on blood. The sins echo still. Then silence. The figures were gone. Marin looked up. In the center of the room, where the altar once stood, the floor cracked, splintered. Opened. Beneath it, more darkness. A spiral staircase. Carved bone handrails. Cobwebs. The scent of rot. She had no choice. She descended. This time, she entered a library. Endless shelves lined with books bound in leather. Some moved, breathing, whispering. She pulled one. The Liturgy of Forgotten Souls. The cover opened itself. Inside, illustrations of rituals, sacrifices, the transformation of light into shadow. Diagrams of the church, how it had been built atop something older, something buried, something worshipped. At the center of the book, a family tree. Her name was there, Marin, scrawled in ink that moved. She dropped the book. It hissed and slithered back onto the shelf. Suddenly, the shelves collapsed inward, the room shrinking, the ceiling lowered. She ran, through another arch, into a circular chamber. In the center, a well, a rope, a bell. A child's voice echoed. She rang the bell for help, but no one came. Marin turned. A girl stood at the edge of the well, pale, thin, eyes like cracked glass. You shouldn't have come back. What is this place? Marin asked. Your inheritance. The girl stepped backward into the well, fell. No sound of a splash, only silence. Marin peered in. The rope coiled like a serpent. A heartbeat pulsed from deep within. Something down there was alive, calling her. She backed away, but the chamber was gone. Walls now pressed against her, breathing. The stone itself pulsating like flesh. She screamed, ran. A door appeared. She lunged through. Back in the church. The real church. Or what passed for real. Pews back in disarray. Ashes on the floor. Her flashlight blinked out. She dropped it. Through the broken window, she saw dawn breaking. Light at last. She stumbled outside, gasping. Behind her, the church groaned and whispered, You will return. The morning came as a cruel deception. Though the sun broke through the clouded Missouri sky, casting a pale amber wash over the remains of the church, nothing about the day felt new. Smoke still curled up from the cinders, rising into the still air like whispers from the dead. Sheriff Boone stood at the edge of the scorched foundation, his boots blackened with ash, staring at the hollow shell of what had once been a house of worship. But now it looked more like a mouth wide open, screaming silently into the void. All around him were townsfolk, some holding children, others holding nothing but their disbelief. Reverend Holbrook's Bible had been found, charred and fused shut, among what remained of the pulpit. But no bodies, not a single bone, not a scrap of cloth. 80 souls had walked into that church for worship. None walked out. Boone turned as the sound of horse hooves approached. It was Caleb Monroe, the young schoolteacher with a face too pale for someone who hadn't stepped into the fire. They're saying it was divine judgment, Caleb said. Some are packing up already, heading east. Others think we'll be next. Boone didn't answer. Instead, he looked at the scorch bell that now lay cracked and twisted on the ground, its insides melted into a lump. The last thing anyone had heard before the fire consumed the church was that bell ringing once, long and low, as if struck by something not quite human. He sighed, then turned to Caleb. You and I both know this ain't judgment. It's something worse. By mid-afternoon, the courthouse was full. Not with criminals or politicians, but townsfolk clutching Bibles and rosaries, whispering with dry mouths and wide eyes. Boone stood before them, not as sheriff now, but as witness. He cleared his throat. The fire started just after the fourth hymn. He began. I was walking down Market Street when I heard the bell ring. I thought it was strange. Wasn't no time for a toll. He paused. I saw smoke by the time I reached Dawson's barn. I ran, but when I got to the church, it was already gone. Gasps filled the room. A woman fainted. A child cried. Gone, someone whispered. Not burnin'. Gone. Devoured. The mayor stood. You're saying it burned that fast? I'm saying it didn't burn. I'm saying it was taken. A low murmur rose like a storm brewing in throats. And then an old man stood up. Elijah Brandt, who hadn't spoken since his son was killed in the mine collapse 2 years prior. I saw her, he rasped. Boone turned sharply. Saw who? Elijah's eyes were glassy, his voice dry. The woman in black. Standing at the altar just as the smoke began. She didn't move, didn't scream, just stared. Then she turned and walked straight into the fire, like she was lead in them. A collective shudder passed through the room. You mean the same woman who's been seen at the riverbanks? Caleb asked. The one they say walks barefoot with burnt hands? Elijah nodded. Boone leaned forward. We need to find her. That night, the town square emptied quickly. No prayers. No gatherings. Doors locked. Windows shut. Boone and Caleb stood near the smoldering ruin again, watching as fog curled around it. Boone lifted a lantern, casting its glow over the soot-covered pews. She's drawn to the church, Boone said. Always has been. Maybe she was never there to worship. Maybe she was waiting. For what? Caleb asked. Boone stared into the ruins. For the right sermon. The next morning, something was waiting on the old church steps. Not footprints. Not symbols. A sermon. Pages torn from Reverend Holbrook's own writing. Yet none of it was in his hand. Boone picked one up with a gloved hand, reading aloud. The flames will not consume what was never truly living. These are not the days of wrath, but the days of collection. They sang not to the heavens, but into the pit, and the pit has answered. Boone's jaw clenched. There were 10 pages in total, each one filled with words that curled and twisted like they were burned into the paper, not written. This isn't scripture, he said. This is a warning. Caleb swallowed. Then what do we do now? Boone turned toward the town square. We prepare for a second sermon. By nightfall, Boone stood alone inside the hollow frame of the church. The skeleton of what had once been holy now felt like a wound in the earth. Around him, he'd laid candles, but not for prayer, for bait. He'd read through the pages again and again, searching for patterns. And it was on the 8th page that he found it, a phrase repeated over and over. She walks where hymns die. And so he waited. Hours passed. Then, as midnight neared, he heard it, singing, a soft, discordant lullaby, echoing through the beams. Not from a human throat. It was cracked and dry, layered like the voice of someone split across time. Boone rose and stepped into the aisle. There she was, a woman in a soot-black dress, barefoot, her hair long and clumped with ash. Her hands were burned and blistered, but she didn't seem to notice. She stood before the altar, her face obscured in shadow. Boone lifted the lantern. Who are you? He asked. She turned. Her eyes were voids. I am the echo, she said, the memory of a congregation who sang the wrong song. Boone's breath caught. Where did they go? He asked. She tilted her head. Where all blind faith leads, into the mouth of the hungry him. He took a step forward. I want them back. She did not laugh. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was laughter enough. They were already hollow, she said. I only opened the door. Boone raised his revolver. Close it. But the woman only stepped backward into the pulpit and vanished into smoke. The next morning, there were no ashes on the church floor, no broken pews, no sermon pages, just Boone's hat, and in the center of the foundation, burned into the wood, were the words, "The next congregation waits." Back in the courthouse, Caleb found Boone's journal. Inside, the sheriff had written his last entry in shaky, almost desperate handwriting. They were already hers, from the moment they sang with blind eyes. She's not a ghost. She's a reckoning. And she doesn't come for the wicked. She comes for the faithful. Now the town is empty. The well water tastes of soot. The fields won't grow. And on the wind, when the dusk falls, you can still hear the hymn, the same one they sang that night, echoing softly through the trees, like a sermon from a forgotten God. And in the distance, the bell tolls, not for the dead, but for the next to come. The sea, by its very nature, is a devourer of truth. It swallows evidence, it smothers voices, and it buries time beneath endless waves. As the final records of the Valencia's journey came into view, interview transcripts, church burial logs, letters half-burned but still legible, one thing became agonizingly clear. Nothing we thought we knew about those 12 missing souls was ever real. Or rather, the truth had been hiding in plain sight, tucked between lines in ancient scripture, and whispered through generations that were too afraid to remember. The last known confession came not from the sea, but from land, from a coastal chapel 200 miles north of where the ship had allegedly sunk. An aging friar named Elias Carter, blind in one eye and hunched from decades of penance, summoned a historian in 1923 to cleanse a truth too foul for God's ears. That historian was my great-grandfather, and his journals, sealed for nearly a century, were handed to me on the day my own son was born. A strange inheritance, weighted with mildew and madness. Inside those journals was a final account, part testimony, part warning. Friar Elias spoke of a night in November 1899 when 12 strangers arrived at his chapel, soaked and silent, just after midnight. They did not knock. They stood, shoulder to shoulder, at the threshold until the wind blew the chapel door open on its own. The bell above the steeple never rang, but the candles inside flickered violently, like they recognized who had entered. None of the 12 spoke a word. They sat in the pews, dripping salt water and blood. Their clothes were torn, their faces gaunt and unfamiliar. One woman clutched a locket so tightly her palm bled in the shape of a cross. Another man carried a captain's log that smelled of oil and rot. A child hummed a tune that made Elias weep instantly. He didn't know the song, but it filled him with a grief so sharp he vomited behind the altar. He wrote, "They were not passengers. They were not survivors. They were tolls paid to something far older than the ocean." The 12 remained in the chapel until dawn, unmoving and unspeaking. Friar Elias, trembling with fear, retreated to the sacristy and began reciting prayers he barely remembered, fumbling over the Latin, as though the very words recoiled in his mouth. Outside, the storm that had delivered the strangers had calmed. The sea was quiet, too quiet. Not a gull cried. Not a single wave broke against the rocks. Elias mustered the courage to step out from the shadows and face them. As he walked the aisle between the pews, he realized something horrifying. These people were not aging. Their wounds did not scab. Their skin did not warm. They remained as they were when they entered, frozen in their wet, wrecked condition. And yet there was no smell of decay, only the lingering scent of brine and smoke. One of them, a boy no older than 7, lifted his gaze and met Elias's eyes. That was all it took. A vision slammed into the friar's mind. The Valencia, not breaking against rocks as they believed, but swallowed whole by an impossible mouth beneath the waves. It wasn't a shipwreck. It was a sacrifice. The ship, its crew, and its 12 unnamed passengers had been taken in exchange for something or someone. The boy blinked once. Blood dripped from his nose. The next entry in Elias's journal was scrawled in a different hand. A young acolyte named Simon had taken over writing after finding Elias convulsing on the chapel floor, whispering. They never signed the manifest. They were already dead before they boarded. Simon cared for the friar for 3 weeks. During that time, Elias refused food, drink, or light. He demanded the windows be blacked out and the bell silenced. He would wake screaming that the ocean had hands and that they were reaching inland, clawing toward the chapel every night. Simon tried to understand. He read the old ship logs, tried to trace the Valencia's final course, and found something chilling. The ship had left port with no official record of any passengers. Just a skeleton crew. No one had signed the manifest. And yet, 12 caskets were later buried under unmarked headstones near the chapel grounds. Their names were never carved. Elias died on the winter solstice, his mouth still open mid-prayer. The chapel bell, which had not rung for weeks, tolled once at the moment of his death. No one pulled the rope. Simon disappeared 2 days later. Only his boots were found, placed neatly at the shoreline. By 1901, the chapel had been shuttered by the diocese. No official reason was given, but those who lived along the coast whispered it had become cursed ground, a place that fed off memory, time, and faith itself. The fog never lifted. Birds avoided the steeple, and anyone who dared enter claimed the pews were never empty, even when they were alone. In 1910, a young historian named Beatrice Lyle arrived in Eld Hollow. She had been researching maritime disappearances for a book on unexplained sea tragedies and had come across the name Valencia repeatedly in obscure records and forgotten telegrams. What disturbed her most was the pattern. Each reference hinted not at a disaster, but a return. Her journals, preserved by the local museum, detail what happened next. Beatrice made her way to the chapel by lantern light. The forest, though thin on the map, had grown thick and impassable. Trees leaned unnaturally toward the path, and her compass refused to settle. It spun slowly, a useless clock in a timeless space. Yet she found the chapel before dawn, its wooden door slightly ajar. The smell of brine and rot greeted her. Inside, her light flickered as if gasping for air. Dust coated every surface, but the center aisle was clear. Something or someone had been walking it regularly. She found pews still arranged in perfect rows. The altar, covered in a white cloth now yellowed with time, bore a single item: the ship's bell of the Valencia, rusted and blackened. She did not remember ringing it, but she heard a toll, 12 times. Then silence. Beatrice turned to leave. The door she entered through was gone, replaced by a wall of wooden boards that hadn't been there moments before. Her breath caught. She stepped backward, and that's when she saw them. 12 silhouettes, sitting quietly, facing her. Not statues, not illusions. Their eyes shone wet in the lantern light. One of them, a tall woman in a soaked Victorian dress, lifted her hand and pointed behind Beatrice. She turned slowly. The ship's manifest was nailed to the door that hadn't been there seconds before. A single name had appeared at the bottom: Beatrice Lyle. She dropped the lantern. Darkness swallowed the chapel. Beatrice was never seen again. Only her journal made it back, found lying open in a boat that washed ashore 6 miles north of Eld Hollow. The last page contained a single sentence: "They are still boarding. The chapel still stands today." Locals say if you walk past it on foggy nights, you can hear the creak of a wooden deck, the snap of sails, and 12 bells. Some say they've seen a woman in period dress staring from the high window above the altar, lantern in hand, waiting for you to sign the manifest.